I just want to share with you all that what I'm going to share now is some reflections in answer to the question that we are asked, that come from several decades of working in the United Nations system on issues of religious engagement, around children, around environment, around peace and security, around human rights in general, around women and gender empowerment, the whole thing. And then making a deliberate decision to leave the United Nations and to serve, to leave the United Nations of secular governments, supposedly, and now to serve the religious institutions and faith communities of the world. And I will explain why in a second. And perhaps preliminary to that, just to share that I think from the research we did in 2003, looking at how women are engaging, women from different religions, from different parts of the world have been engaging over, I don't know, hundreds of years on issues of community development, social empowerment, social services. We realize that the average number of women serving in religious communities is too much to count. So it was impossible to calculate how much women do, because they're the backbone of all religious communities around the world. So it was impossible to get a tally, a figure to it. But we also realized that 90% of those serving communities in the name of their religion or as inspired by their faith in religious institutions, in religious NGOs, that 90% of those actually doing the service provision, which includes everything from coordinating and planning and structuring to providing, 90% are women. So that contrary to what we would think, of course, men and women are both very, very active, but those actually delivering on the ground, 90% of them are women. This applies to all faith traditions around the world. So that's just a background statistic. Fast forward to how difficult it is to get the secular international development and foreign policy institutions to see the value added of religions in general. And I'll share one small anecdote with you. I have the privilege of serving on the United Nations Secretary General's High-Level Advisory Board on Effective Multilateralism that is just presenting its report now to the Secretary General and then eventually to the General Assembly and the Security Council. I cannot tell you how challenging it was to listen to very, very esteemed, extremely competent, very capable individuals, each representing massive organizations around the world, basically say how it is problematic to refer to the word religion itself, just to say religion or anything religious. And one of them validated this concern by saying, well, first of all, so many problems happen in the name of religion. All our problems seem to come from that space. And then the immediate sequel to that is, besides, if we start acknowledging the religious realms, I'm paraphrasing, if we start to acknowledge the religion, what are we going to do about these Muslims? I say this because it's important to bear in mind that that is a mindset within and amongst so many of the policymakers who are themselves part of the believing community, by the way. These are not avowed atheists or whatever. These are practicing in many cases. So important to bear that in mind when we think in terms of how do we then work together. And the third and last point I want to make is the call for religious women's engagement is not new. It's pretty old. It's been there for, I mean, sometimes you don't even need to make the call. It's always been what women do. Women serve. The challenge, though, is that we seem to see increasingly, and this is also beautiful, by the way, an increasing recognition from within the religious communities and outside of the role of women in the faith space. There is an increasing recognition and an acknowledgement of this remarkable role. In the environmental space, by the way, is where this recognition started, because it was women environmentalists from India who started making the case that, every blade of grass, every tree is connected to my livelihood. You cannot do anything on the environment that doesn't touch me as a woman. And that's my faith. That is my faith. And indigenous women were the first to make that case public at the global level in the United Nations system to say our faith is nature. Nature is our sacred. And what you're doing to it is desecrating that which we consider godly. So there's a legacy of environmental activism within the religious realms and religious activism in the environmental realms that's old, very old. It's only the seculars who are now waking up to it. However, as we are waking up to smell it, to smell the coffee of religion and its power and its value and the role of women, we're still doing it in the same old way, which is, at best, the Catholics are looking at the Catholic space. The Protestants are looking at the Protestant space. The Orthodox are looking at the Orthodox space. The Sunnis are looking at the Sunni, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So we're looking at it from very siloed perspectives. But we talk the good talk. Many of us talk the good talk. We've got to work together. We have to acknowledge together. Yes. But we're following in the footsteps of what the men did before, which is to keep it siloed. And yes, I understand that it's absolutely remarkable that every single Catholic can come together and honor that which is in the Laudato Si and in the Holy Bible. I get it, it's incredibly powerful. But even if that were to happen, it would only be 16%, 1/6, of the population of the faithful in this world. So I'm all for it, but I want to alert that as women of faith, the value added has to be more than what the men do and have done in these institutionalized spaces for a long time. I think the issue of the example that was mentioned before is what the so-called secular world is looking to the religious realms for. What are the exemplary forms of leadership and engagement? And I think women religious have every single model at their disposal. But the challenge is, how do you make sure that the women religious themselves are working together in solidarity beyond their religious spectrums and able to mobilize in ways together that can serve as examples for what many of the male religious leaders are doing. What we're seeing is more replication, more initiatives which are identical to one another but given different names. We're seeing that begin to happen in the religious space. And I would warn, I was a daughter of the movement for democracy, good governance, and human rights in the 70s and 80s. I am a product of that movement. And look at where we are now. We invested millions, hundreds of millions in democracy, good governance, and human rights. And look at where we are now. Human rights are desecrated left, right, and center. Even age-old democracies are behaving atrociously. And we no longer know what the rule of law means in the most established democratic institutions of the world. So I'm sorry, I'm seeing the same thing begin to happen when it comes to religion. Yes, we are now all very happy about religion, all working with religion and the faith, and we're duplicating and replicating the same. I am terrified at what the implication will be. Will we now all collectively lose faith?